Now we come to Chapter 37, R3-Vav verbs. Here they're often called by grammarians Lamed Hey verbs, and by that they mean R3 Hey verbs. But that's really not the proper way of describing these. Really, it's not an R3 Hey or Lamed Hey verb. That would be a verb that would have a Hey with a mapik in it. And of course, we covered that with an R3 guttural verbs. But what we really have here is a verb that really had an original Vav or Yod in the R3 position. And if you look at section 1 of chapter 37, I give you an example or two of where the Vav is still existing there in the R3 position, or a Yod existing in the R3 position, as you see there. And again, the weakness of a Vav or a Yod in an R3 position is very similar to the ones we've had in R1 and also in R2, namely the tendency for the Vav or Yod to quiesce, to contract, these types of problems. And so that's the problems we have to look for. Now, as we approach this verb, we're going to approach this verb a little differently than we have the other verbs. I have here an R1 guttural verb, and this is just typical of how we've approached things so far. What we would do is we would take things really sort of vertically. We would talk about the hafal, we would talk about the hifil, the intensives, and then we'd talk about the nifal, and finally we would come to the call where the difficulties really were, and we would talk about the call. But this time, however, we have a little bit different situation. Instead of going down and talking about the hafal and the hifil and so forth, we're really going to go, instead of vertically, we're going to go horizontally. And so this time, we're going to talk about the perfect, and when we talk about the perfect, that will count for the call, the nifal, pl, pual, hithpael, hifil, hafal. So instead of going by the stem, we're really going to go by the conjugation of perfect, imperfect, imperative, then the infinitives and the participle. And again, the statement we make about the perfect will be for the call and for all other of the stems. And so this time, as we approach this verb, it is a little different than what we've done in the past. So when we talk about the perfect, we're going to talk about all perfects and throughout the stems. And so a little bit different way we're going to approach it. Now, indeed, we've already talked about the infirmities of the Vav, the sense that it likes to contract, to quiesce. But there are places in which we still see the Vav and the Yod, and so there are just a few areas where it is strong. And so let's look at it. Here we have the cow passive participle, shamur, which you're familiar with. And when we look at the R3 Vav Yod, we get banui. And really, the bait would be, of course, the R1. The noon is R2. The shurik, of course, is the shurik that you see, the thematic vowel you see for the cow passive participle. But the resh here, the R3 of the strong verb, of course, is the Yod here. And this Yod is consonantal. And so this is just like a strong verb here with banui. You can see banui, shamur. They're really the same thing. Also, you get these rare forms that occur from time to time. It's not just the perfect 1CS, but it's just occasionally you'll get these rare forms that occur where you actually see the Vav or the Yod. In this example here, shalavti, you see, you get this Vav here. And again, that's very rare you get a form like this, but it does happen from time to time. Well, now as we go to the remedies of how we're going to try to cure the sickness of this verb, again, we're going to start with the perfect. And so as we look at the perfect, we have some endings that we need to memorize. And so for all your perfects, the third persons, we really do have to look at certain endings. And the first one here is this comet's hey. And normally for comet's hey, we think of a 3FS, but this time it's a little different. And so bana here is a masculine, a third masculine singular. Of course, you've already sort of learned these in some vocabulary items, but still. And then, of course, you see the PL here, gila. You can see the ending is a comet's hey. And when you come to the 3FS, notice that you'll have a vocal schwa with the R2 consonant. And then here's your ending. You're going to have this T, this tav with a kametz, and then a phony hey. So look at the examples for the kal. You notice we have the metheg here, so that is a vocal schwa. Banata. by the way, this tav here is obviously the feminine tav that you've seen with attaching pronominal suffixes, with T-form participles, with nouns and constructorat, and so forth. So that T is clearly something that you know about. And then again, I just give it to you as a PL. But it would be the same for a hifil and everything else. And with the hifil, again, you would not have your hirik yod. You would simply have this ending placed on to a hifil box on the front of it. And then for your 3CP, again, you're going to get the shurek. It attaches, again, directly onto the second root letter. And again, I show you the PL form also. And again, I show you here at the bottom that some pausal forms will actually bring back the yod. And so you see with these two forms here, they're pausal forms, you can see the original yod being brought back with the pausal form. And so you want to keep that in mind. Well, that's for your third persons of the perfect. What happens when we get outside of third persons? When we get outside of third persons, what we're going to do is we're going to have some contractions. And so I mentioned those contractions here. You can get a hirik yod contraction in your call, your PL, your hithpil, and your hifil. And so what I give you over here on the right side is I give you the form, and notice that the thematic vowel is a hirik under the noon. And so that hirik and the yod see each other, and of course what do you get? You get a Hebrew love story. And so the consonantal yod quiesces, you get the hirik yod, and so the yod is still visible, but now it's become, of course, part of a vowel, and you say baniti, you see. And then I give you again a PL example, and again with the PL you can see you have a hirik under the lamed, and that hirik again will fall in love again with yod, and you're going to get a quiescing of the yod. It becomes a vowel, and so you say galiti, as you see here. However, you don't always get the hirik yod. You also can get seirei yod, and you get that with your nifal, your pu'al, and your hafal. And so here, notice that the thematic vowel is a patach, not a hirik. And therefore, when you contract, it's the usual contraction you're used to, ay becoming a seirei yod. And so I becomes a, and I give you here a nifal, a nigleti, and then you get a pu'al, gu-leti, you see, for these forms. Now, there's exceptions to this. Sometimes you can see a seirei yod for a PL or so forth, and sometimes you can get the hirik yod down here with a nifal, pu'al, hafal. So sometimes there can be little differences, but in general, this is what is correct. So for all of your perfects, this is the way we're going to approach these. As we come to the imperfect, of course, we have non-endings for the imperfect, as you remember if you go back to chapter 18. And so for those that have no ending, the ending you're going to put on is a segol hey. The box there with the segol obviously will go with the R2 letter, and then you're going to have a segol hey. And then if you notice the footnotes down there, I explained to you the contraction that probably took place in order to get these forms. And so I'll let you look at those contractions down there. And so I give you a couple of examples again. I show you a call imperfect 3ms. You can see how we simply put the segol hey on the end. And the same thing with a nifal imperfect 3ms. Again, you can see the box on the front of the word looks fine. But again, we're dealing with a third weak verb, and therefore it's usually not the box, but it's the thematic vowel and sometimes the call that gets changed, and you can see that there. With vocalic endings, the vocalic ending, of course, attaches directly to the R2 consonant, and you can see that with yif-nu and yar-bu. And you can see with the hifil, you don't see your normal hirik yod that you're so used to, but you can see the box here on the front. So again, you've got to watch out for that. The dagesh in the bait, by the way, is just a bigad kafad. There's no assimilation going on. Then we have the syllabic endings. And with the syllabic ending, we're talking here about the call imperfect second and third feminine plural. And here, notice your contraction you get. You get the I going to A, going to the seirei. But because the last syllable has a kametz, the sere is made into a segol. And again, we've seen that many times. And notice it takes the accent also. And by the way, this segol yod you've seen many times before. We've seen it in hollow verbs. We've seen it even in R3 aleph verbs and so forth. It probably comes from these forms here. It probably spread from the R3 yod vav into these other paradigms. And so keep that in mind. And again, I tell you about the contraction of that. Now we come to the real difficulty of the imperfects, because when we talk about imperfects, we're really also, we throw in there the jussives and the vav consecutive forms. And here we have a real difference. Notice the example that I give you here in the call 3ms, the imperfect yigle. You can see this is a non-ending, and therefore it gets the segol hey at the end. But with the jussive, it's as if you rip off the segol hey. And of course, when you rip that off, look at the pattern you get here. You get a short vowel with two silent schwas. And again, when you see that, you should immediately think of sefer, because this is like a sefer's protoform, the seglet noun, sifr, you know, with the samic and so forth. With the hirik, and again, I list that, I want you to compare it down here. And then I put the vav consecutive on, because again, the vav consecutive is always placed on the jussive form, not really the imperfect form, to be technical here. And so here you can see the vav consecutive. And so now I mentioned to you that for the call, jussive and vav consecutive, 4 forms are theoretically possible. And I give you 4 forms down here. And with these forms, you could just place a vav consecutive on the front of it, and that would be okay. Notice 2 of the forms are with hirik. And again, here is the first one is a seglet form that just hasn't gone through the seglet process yet. And so it looks like an original seglet form with the, let's say, the consonantal cluster. But then here you can see they've inserted the segol, so you can see the process has begun, but notice that the performative does not go all the way to the seglet pattern, and so you get yigel. So this is different. This is different. So it's almost a half a seglet here at the end. Or you can get sere. So notice you get sere with the performative, but again you get what looks like a seglet form with the consonantal cluster. Or again, they will insert the segol, but you don't get the other segol, you just get the sere. And again, this form is very similar to sefer. So sometimes you see forms that look like seglet nouns, and they're not nouns at all. They're actually verbs. They can be jussives, but normally you're going to see them with the vav consecutive, and that vav consecutive obviously will tell you it's a verb. So to see a form like this, it occurs in Hebrew, but it's rare. Normally you'll see it with the vav consecutive, and that'll be a great tip-off. I'm looking at a verb. I'm not looking at a seglet noun. So that will help you a lot, that the presence of the vav consecutive is a big help. Now let's look at the hifil. In the hifil, we have the same problem, and namely, look at the imperfect. Again, it ends with a segol hey. Notice again, there's none of that hirik yod stuff that you normally are used to. It's gone in these forms. And then with the jussive, you simply rip off the ending, and again, you get that seglet form with a consonantal cluster, yagel. This doesn't sound like Hebrew, does it? And then I show you the vav consecutive forms, and you can either get vayagel, or it becomes a complete seglet noun with the 2 segols, vayegel. You see, now again, you might think, well, maybe that's a seglet noun, not with the pointing of the vav consecutive. It's impossible. It cannot be. So, in the hifil, jussive and vav consecutive, 2 forms are theoretically possible. The one with the patach, and again, think of mach, and also with the segols, and again, this is just like melech, and so you say yegel. And so you've got to watch that. For the other conjugations, let's look at those for just a second. We have, of course, the nifal, 3ms. Here, notice again that the segol hey drops out. And here would be your theoretical adjussive form. And of course there's a heric under this yod here at the beginning. And you can see the Vav consecutive form here. And again, there's no ending whatsoever. Here you don't have a seglet type formation because you've got that big, juicy kametz. And because of that kametz, you're not going to have the seglet pattern. Notice the PL3MS. You can see the ending with the segol hey. But when you rip that off, notice that the dagesh in R2 is now hovering. And if there were some kind of ending put on here, a vocalic ending, a pronominal suffix, the dagesh would again drop back down into the lamed. And then here's with the Vav consecutive attached. Notice here there's no dagesh forte in the yod. That's because of the Skin and Levy rule, which above here with the heric, you're always going to get the dagesh forte. And so again, the pual, you can see the ending. And then with the adjussive, you can see the ending that is missing. And then again, just place the Vav consecutive on. And then the Hithpael works the same way, as you see here. And then finally, the Hafal down here. Now let's go to the imperatives. With the imperatives, they're very similar to your imperfects. First, you have non-endings. In the non-ending of the imperative, you're going to have a seire hey. The seire will be, of course, under the second root letter. And so I give you the imperative 2ms, b'nai, and the imperative 2ms, kale, as you see there. With vocalic endings, again, the vocalic endings will attach directly to the R2 consonant. And you can see b'ni, harbi, the hifil again. You don't get your normal, again, this is a hifil imperative 2fs. And so that's what that heric yod is. It's not the normal heric yod of the thematic vowel that you normally associate with the hifil. And then you have the syllabic ending again. And this is your second and third feminine plural. Again, you get this segol yod by contraction, as we discussed in the imperfect. For your infinitives, you have the infinitive absolute, and you can have one of two endings for the infinitive absolute. Normally, you get this holum with a hey. And this is for the call, the nifal, the pl, and the pual. Again, sometimes you can also get the seire hey, and that would be for the hifil, hafal, hithpael. And again, this form could look very much like an imperative or like an infinitive absolute. Context would have to really help you out here. Again, sometimes you can get seire hey for one of the forms up here, and sometimes you can get the holum for one of the forms down here. But again, in general, this is correct, what I have here for you. And so, again, you want to memorize it in this way. And I give you examples. Here's the infinitive absolute, bano. And then here is the hifil infinitive absolute, hagle. So, again, you want to keep these things in mind. Now we want to look at the infinitive construct. And the infinitive construct ends with an ot ending, this holum vav and then a tav, and I give you the call, banot, and then the pl infinitive construct, kalot, for you to look at. Now we come to the participles. And again, with the participles, the masculine singular absolute ends in a segol hey. Now I know you're thinking, well, maybe I'll confuse that with the imperfect, but you really will not, because look at the holum that you're so used to seeing for a call participle. So you're not going to have a problem there. And with the other forms, you're going to get a mem on the front or something like that, so, or a noon for the nifal. So there's not going to be any problem here. You're going to do, this should not give you a problem here. And then again, when you attach noun or adjective endings on to the participle, notice that you will directly attach it to R2, just like a vocalic ending on certain forms of the verb. Now we have the feminine singular T form, and it's going to end up being a seire yod, because what's going to happen, you would expect, of course, the seglet pattern, but the yod is quiescing with the seire, and because seire yod, they're also they like each other a lot too, just like heric yod, and so they quiesce together. And when they do that, of course, you'll see this form, and that's very similar to the form we learned with a R3 Aleph verb. And so in the examples I give you, you can see here's the call participle feminine singular T form bonate, and you can see how similar it is to an R3-Vav verb with mosate. Okay, when we get to the cow passive participle, again, this is completely regular. The yod is functioning as R3. It's a consonant functioning as R3, so I contrast the strong with it here, and again, it's really identical. Now, in section 5, we're attaching pronominal suffixes to these forms. And in the 3MS, the suffix is attached directly onto R2. And then, as I say here, the other forms follow the strong pattern. And by that, here I have a third feminine singular. And you know R3 normally gets the accent, so here it's going to be R2. But then the other forms, either your tav or your nun is going to receive the accent of the the suffix that goes on the verb, not the pronominal suffix that's attached though. And then with your historic long vowels, obviously again, third persons, they like to accent R3. This time it's going to be R2 because R3 is basically gone. So again, you want to keep that in mind also. When you come to your imperfect and your imperatives, again, they're going to attach directly to R2. Your infinitive construct, you're going to put that oat ending, and then you're going to attach the pronominal suffix directly onto that oat ending for your infinitive construct. And then again for your participle, same thing, you will attach it directly onto R2. Well, now we come to the parsing and the forming of these forms. And when we do it, again, the boxes are still going to be in play for us. But really, your thematic vowel and in some ways your call is replaced. And not always. We're going to still need the call, but it's especially the colors, that section there, that we're going to have to replace with usually some type of ending to be attached. So it's going to be the end of the verb that's going to be affected as we start parsing here. And so let's look at the parsing of these forms. The first example I have for you is a Hifil perfect 3FS. So our root here is gala. But let me do the box first. And again, the box that you are expecting is, of course, the Hifil. The H of the Hifil, because the Hifil in the perfect is a Hifil. And then the silent schwa. And again, that's going to remain. That's not going to be a problem because, again, our weakness is back here, and so it's going to affect the thematic vowel. And so our first step, as I write the verb, is to attach the box. The next step would be our colors, but again, at this time we can't have colors. And what we're going to need is some type of ending, and I'm wanting a 3FS, and what you had to learn was, and even though it's a Hifil, doesn't matter, you want a vocal schwa, you want the feminine tav with a kametz, and then a final phony hey to get you to read a kametz here. And really, this is going to also not only take up the thematic vowel, but it's also going to take up the call. And so really, that's it. There's nothing else to do to this verb. Again, all what we're doing is we're having to remember certain endings for the perfect and for the imperfect and so forth. And so that's exactly what I was applying there. For the perfect 3FS, we had to memorize this. If it were another form, suppose it were a 3CP, then again what we would do this time is attach the 3CP ending directly. If we were looking at a form like a 1CS, then here we would have a different formation. We would have, we'd bring that yod back if we want to do a 1CS, and this would, the original form would look something like this. The hirik yod would quiesce together, and of course when we did that we'd have to get rid of this dagish lene, and we would end up with something like this, higliti. And so again, these are the type of things that we've got to remember, and it applies across the board, whether we're talking about a call, a PL, pual, hifil, whatever we're doing. Okay, the next one is a parse, and so let's look at the parsing here. The form is Okay, here's the form. And as we go after this, obviously we're going to do the boxes and so forth. And when we do the boxes, I hope you immediately see we have a dagesh here, and we have another consonant with a patach, and then we have a mem with a schwa. When you see that, immediately that box should tell you we're looking at like a PL participle. And so just by the box itself, we should immediately be able to say that's a PL participle. But, you know, we don't want to just stop there. We want to talk about some other things associated with this word. And that is, you have an ending here. You have this ending. And, of course, that ending is exactly what you would expect. So not only does the box help us here, but also the ending is what you would expect for an R3-Vav yod. You would expect a segol hey. And so that's what we have, and that's our answer. The answer is a PL participle, masculine singular absolute. And the root that we want to write down for this is, of course, kala. And again, even though it's we say it's a hey here, in reality, the protoform would be a vav or a yod. I could put a yod here also. So it's a vav or a yod that is really the root there. Okay, and one more thing I want to point out to you, and that is nouns. So if you look at section 7, here we talk about certain nouns that are derived from R3 Yod Vav roots. And I mentioned two in particular. Sadeh has a protoform here, as I show you, of sadai. And again, it'd probably be a patach under the sin also, but I'm looking at the ending. The ending is what I'm looking at mostly, so don't worry about the comments there. Which was contracted to a segol hey. And again, it's just the last part that I'm interested in here. And then notice the absolute form, though, becomes a seirei. And again, you want to memorize these types of options for a root like this that ends with a segol hey, because oftentimes the construct form of it will be a seirei hey. And so you want to keep that in mind here as you're looking at this. When you look at this other form here, peri, the protoform was probably as I have it here, which is really a seglet type pattern. But again, when they added in that extra vowel for the seglet pattern here, the hirik in the yod, they added this time a hirik, not a segol, which they would do that from time to time. Using a hirik instead. The hirik and the yod get together, obviously, and make a hirik yod, and then we just simply reduce this original patach, and so we end up with the form pari. And when you put pronominal suffixes on it, which again, look back in the appendices in the back of the book, and I have examples of this, notice you get a word like piryi. These are difficult forms, these are difficult nouns, but look over these, look back in the appendix of putting pronominal suffixes on these words, because again, you do want to be aware of these, and they do occur with some frequency in Hebrew, and so again, you definitely need to look over those words. Well, again, there's a lot of information in chapter 37, and so now what you need to do is read the chapter very closely and then do the questions and the drills.